I'm often asked what got me into using water. The answer is very simple. I was brought up in a house which has a stream running through the garden, and that's the house that I'm now fortunate enough to own. There's a stream that runs from a group of ponds, and a spring spouts from the Hog's Back, which is between Guildford and Farm, and flows down through these 5 ponds, and then becomes a stream which runs through common land, through my garden, and off down to the River Wey. And my parents bought this cottage, they moved into this cottage in 1927, when they shared it with Julian and Juliet Huxley. And then my father took it over after the Second World War, and we've owned it ever since. I was brought up there. My children have enjoyed it, and now my grandchildren are enjoying it, and its water is very much a part of the place. And so it was deeply seated in my psyche, really. And I'm often asked if I have an engineering background, and I don't really have an engineering background. However, my father was an engineer, but he was an academic. I've never been an academic, and there's craft very strongly in my family. I've been involved really in empirical experiment, and whether it is art or engineering is for other people really to make up their own minds about. I produce objects which are strongly dictated by an aesthetic priority, but they're all to do with investigating different phenomena about water. I only came into using water, well into my career, although I had made a fountain when I was a student. I only then started to use water as a vital, integral part of my artworks. Exhibiting sculpture is very much part of our tradition. However, I actually abandoned the art gallery world after about 5 years after the Royal College, and tended to get commissioned works. So these were individual pieces which stood on their own. And when I got involved in exhibiting a certain amount, not very much, not often, I then tended to isolate my works so that they were positioned so that they could be looked at individually, and not as a group. So what is really interesting about this place, the Secret Garden, is that for the first time really, with a single glance, one could comprehend a whole group of pieces all at the same time in one casting one's eye across. And so that in each of these, they all demonstrate a different area of my research. So that on one level, one has roll wave patterning, which was something that I first observed on a Welsh road on a summer holiday when it rained every day, and I noticed the wonderful rhythmical patterns of water rippling down these Welsh roads. And I thought I could simulate that, and went back and did some experiments. And so I've done a whole series of pieces which use roll wave patterning, and I've discovered really that the best underlying material is mirror polished stainless steel, which shows up the movement of water in a way that if you did it on stone or bronze, it wouldn't have that same effect. And then from that, there was a piece that I call the Coanda series, and we have Coanda here. I first observed a fountain in the Vatican, and I noticed that the water was clinging to the underside of this great granite bowl. But it was all falling off on one side, and I realised that, in fact, that it was simply that the granite dish was not quite level. And I thought, if I was to make a bowl which was absolutely precisely level, could I get it to cling to the underside of the thing? And then I was told about Henri Coanda, who's a Romanian scientist, who've investigated how fluids cling to surfaces. And so there are other pieces, and they all demonstrate something about water. So you've got, for instance, the Archimedes screw. There are various ways of demonstrating an Archimedes screw, and one is using this corkscrew tube. Another is by having a sort of drill-like blade running up a trough. But I find this one mysterious. And of course the discoveries that I got from this was the way the water lands when it is poured out at the top. What sort of configuration would it make? The only way to do it was to experiment and try. And so that piece demonstrates this rather surprising way it does. Another is my vessel series, where I became very excited by the way water changes from being still and reflective, apparently still, but then you realize that it isn't still at all. It's moving. It's being drawn down these smooth weirs in the middle. I first saw that in the Pyrenees in a hydroelectric scheme, where there's what's called a spillway in this huge lake. The water was being drawn off the surface, and there was something quite sinister about it. You didn't know quite where it was going down. When you came up to the edge of this thing, and you could look down and see the water flowing down into basically a hydraulic system, so that the roar of water going on many, many meters below where I was standing. Another one is the vortex, because I've always been fascinated by the way vortexes work, and I devised a way of making a vortex. And of course the best way to really demonstrate a vortex is in a transparent vessel, so that you can actually see it from above and through and below. And so I've messed around with vortices. And there is a series that I've called my Starburst, which is rather a corny title, but that was literally playing around with a hose pipe and realizing the effect that water impacting on a piece of glass had and what it did. And so by thrusting a laminar flow, which is a flow with very little turbulence within it, by reducing the turbulence and sending up a shaft of water onto the underside of a piece of glass, and then watching the way that the water radiated out and then forms these little driplets which get bigger and bigger, and then they finally have to drop away into the abyss below.